This program is proudly brought to you by Daytech Limited and the National Information and Communications Technology Authority. In this session of In Focus, we feature discussions on the Reset at 50 agenda, especially some of its proposed reforms and policy changes. Joining us for this discussion is the Director for the Reset at 50 Delivery Unit within the Prime Minister's Department, Charles Abel. Charles Abel, thank you for joining us.
Malcolm, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. Now, firstly, Charles, you're currently running the Reset at 50 agenda that's currently under the Prime Minister's Departments and NEC. Why was the Reset at 50 review established at this stage of Papua New Guinea's history?
It is timely, one would imagine, after 50 years of a child growing up into teenagehood and adulthood or thereabouts, that one reviews the way we've been doing things, and just to take a frank, practical, honest look at our performance and make a judgment. How are we going? Based on what? Evidence and outcomes, statistics, data, international benchmarks. How is Papua New Guinea going relative to the rest of the world in terms of our development aspirations, in terms of what is contained in our constitution? What was contemplated by our forefathers in that constitution? So the government, rightly, through the Prime Minister and Cabinet, decided that at our 50th anniversary, it is only appropriate that we put a magnifying glass on ourselves and be honest about how we are going. And so Cabinet, through NEC Decision number 90/2025, back in about April last year, invited myself as chairman and Arthur Samara as deputy chairman to undertake this very important work. They also appointed a team around us, located us in the Department of Prime Minister and NEC. It is now just the Department of Prime Minister, as has changed. And with the support of the Chief Secretary, we began the work. But we only had a very short period of time before the independence celebrations. So we were had to fast track things and be a bit nimble on our feet and make sure that we did justice to the work. We are always very conscious of not wasting government time and people's money. And we wanted to do the best job we could. So it was a struggle, but we've managed, I think, to come up with a document that is fairly honest and a bit hard-hitting for the government. So I've been saying that it's credit to the Prime Minister and the government that they have kind of exposed themselves to this process. And, quite frankly, bringing a person like myself, who is a little bit opinionated and can be quite honest and a bit brutal, credit to the Prime Minister, honestly, for giving us this platform. And I think the Reset document has a lot of truth in it, and it is based on some very important and deep research by credible institutions that we can talk more about, but led by the National Research Institute, our very own institution, Dr. Sanida and the team down there. So 50 years, how have we done to date? And then what are some recommendations for the next 20 years, a 20-year roadmap? But as I've been saying in the CIMC forums, it's not about the next 20 years, it is, but it is about what we start to do today. And I was just saying to you outside that Reset proposes some major governance reforms that are required. At the same time, it's very conscious of the fact that our people are sick of plans, they're sick of announcements, they want to know what is happening today. And that's why we've been talking about things like Starlink and making the internet available, making the internet free perhaps, to ordinary Papua New Guineans so that they can empower themselves. Because otherwise the structured traditional approach is simply too slow. Technology is moving, the world is moving, Papua New Guinea needs to move. And I think we just need a smarter approach, reset the way we're going about things, and bring some immediate relief and development to our people. That's what Reset is about. But obviously it points out some of the fundamental issues. And this is what we're going to talk about, and the persistent corruption, the lack of implementation, the lack of accountability, the politicization of everything, almost. And so this is affecting what? execution. The biggest problem we have is not the plans. We don't need any more plans. We have good plans and a good planning framework. Even the latest MTDP 5-year plan of the government, MTDP 4, is fine. Vision 2050 is fine. The STARS program I did is excellent. The Constitution is wonderful. The parliamentary constitutional democracy we have is the right system. It's demonstrated to work in terms of human development. That's not the issue. The issue is, why are we not executing those plans? Why has it taken us 50 years with all these blessings to produce outcomes? Why are we ranked 160th in the world out of 192 countries in human development, life expectancy, education and economic growth, GDP per capita? We're lagging well behind, as some of the graphs in our document show, our regional peers and globally. Yet we're such a blessed country. So, 50 years, the government decided it's time for a review, and then we presented that under the authority of NEC Decision 90 of 2025, and then subsequently led to NEC Decision 198 of 2025 that established the delivery unit, which we are running now to try and implement some of these things, some of the legislation and so on that we'll talk about, the upper house and et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk about that. We are coming to the conclusion of that process now. The delivery unit will exit, or it will merge into the department. And one of the deliverables, one of the tenets here in Big Bet, under Big Bet number 10, is ensuring governance reform continues. Yeah, capacitating that. So that's where we are. We published the document, Reset at 50, and you'll come to some of those details there, but we are now in the execution phase of that, and we will be trying to conclude it by the 31st of August to hand over before the 51st anniversary. And success or otherwise, in terms of delivery, at the very least, we feel that Reset has revealed some of the fundamental truths, and we hope this government will continue to drive it. Elections coming up, the future governments also look into it and respond to it.
To what extent does it align with the existing government plans in the likes of MTDP and perhaps Vision 2050?
It doesn't get down into overly detail in terms of sectoral plans. So the MTDPs are more detailed plans. It is more about the framework, the governance framework, the political and bureaucratic framework to drive those plans. Okay? Most of what's contained in those plans about economic growth and expansion of education, health services, and etc., they're fine, they're well and good. It is, as I keep saying, it is the execution of those plans that are the issue. So we're not here to make another MTDP. MTDP 4 is fine. The main targets about economic growth, I said, is just fine. We're here to address the governance framework that is not enabling the execution of those plans in a timely manner. That is allowing Papua New Guinea to languish at the bottom in terms of human development. Okay? So it is trying to reset back to the Constitution. How is this governance framework supposed to be? Why is politics dominating everything? Where is the rest of the institutional framework that is meant to balance with the politics? Bureaucracy is being eroded. Constitutional office holders are being eroded. Parliament itself is being eroded because executive government is becoming overly dominant. So constitutional balance, parliamentary governance has been undermined. And this has trickled down into bureaucratic erosion and pretty much everything else. It leads away from focus on service delivery and more on political expediency, entrenchment, accumulation of wealth.
Is there a particular example that you can cite to illustrate your point?
Well, I'll give you a simple example. You know, Papua New Guinea has the biggest cabinet in the world for a country of population above 10 million. We have the biggest cabinet in the world. And records tell us that the bigger the cabinet, the lower you are ranked in terms of development, you see. Because it indicates an emphasis on politics rather than on development. The smaller the cabinet is, the best developed countries in the world in terms of human development have the smallest cabinets. So we didn't start that way. There was more of a balance. It's an accumulation over time. As executive government rises, it then feeds executive government. It fosters to and panders to the needs of executive government. So you build a bigger cabinet, you dominate parliament, legislation gets passed quickly. More funding goes directly to mechanisms outside the constitutional framework. Provincial governments starve, local level governments are starved, bureaucracy is undermined. But perhaps district development authorities and DSIP, can you see what I'm saying? So there's a dysfunctionality caused when a system is fundamentally out of balance, okay? And what happens is that we spend a lot of our time managing the politics around that. It's sort of self-perpetuating. Prime Minister spends a lot of his time managing politics, dealing with emotions, no confidence, and keeping a big team of people happy.
Would you say,
but neglecting perhaps the mass requirements? Yeah.
Would you say the political culture in Papua New Guinea has somewhat contributed to this?
It's political culture, but it's not unique to Papua New Guinea. You know, Papua New Guinea has some resilience in a sense to the usual temptations. A lot of countries have, in fact, had worse experiences than us. But we shouldn't set our bar at that low standard. It's just politics being politics, and governance being governance. They're universal principles. This is the best system there is. Constitutional parliamentary democracy is the best system there is. As I said, the top 50 countries in the world, 85% of them have a parliamentary democracy, like we do. It's just that over time, they've learnt lessons like we are learning and maintain that balance better. So it's not that we want to throw out this system. It's just that we need to understand how it is meant to work and make sure it is working that way, that it doesn't fundamentally become unbalanced, okay? Of course, as I said, the good thing is that we have not deviated from that system too much. We haven't thrown it out and gone to a dictatorship or military junta or even a presidential system, which is, again, direct election of a prime minister or president is not good. It's okay, it can be okay, but our system is better. Human development is the yardstick, and the top 10 countries in the world in human development have this system. The top 50, 85% have this system. So it's a demonstrated system. It's just you must understand there are 3 arms of government, and there is a critical balance that must be maintained as per the Constitution. Once one starts to get too powerful, the ship can start to tip very quickly and become unbalanced. And everything else that's supposed to work starts to become dysfunctional. So reset is just reminding us what are the first principles of the Constitution. And instead of diving down to put out this fire, corruption, poverty, kankan or something, you've got to come back and understand these are symptoms of not allowing this governance framework to work as it should. Okay? See, why is there corruption? Because there's lack of accountability. Why is there lack of accountability? Because the institutions that are meant to maintain accountability are being eroded or not supported, or the wrong people are being appointed. Who is appointing those people? Can you see? How are the budgets working? Is the bureaucracy being supported? There's some details that I could say which I won't say, but they're indicative again of politicians taking too much control of everything. Appointment process, procurement process. Funding means where you put funding into locations that doesn't have a proper mechanism around it, and gives who? The politician too much power and authority over it. Okay? So he has power, too much authority over the public service and the system, and it leads to dysfunctionality. Yeah. So we mustn't get too. It's important. Let's deal with the symptoms, but to fix those symptoms, you have to come back and fix the source of the issue. And it's a governance, as I said earlier, a governance and a management issue. Okay? You may have an excellent Prime Minister that is determined to do many good things. You know, Prime Minister out today is a good man, but he's in a system that makes it very difficult to function because of the things I mentioned. So he is initiating this process, but he needs to have the political will and people around him that encourage him to bring these reforms, to resist the temptation to keep pandering to those things and allowing it to get worse. He's got to come back and have the strength and get the cabinet around in Parliament and encourage them. We need to understand what the true issues are, and we need to make sure that we bring the necessary legislation and other reforms to start to wind back to that balance that is required. And it's difficult to do because you're going to act out of your self-interest. You don't necessarily want to rebalance power. You want to maintain power. You want to stay in power forever. Things like limiting the terms of the Prime Minister to 2 terms will help to discourage this. bringing in independence to the office of the Speaker, strengthening the office of the opposition is very important, okay? And another one is bringing the upper house, move the governors to an upper house, be more checks on the executive government. When legislation comes through, it's got to go to the upper house and get screened. It gives governors leverage as well to do what? Support decentralization. Support local level governments and provincial governments. This is where the people live. We always talk about resourcing and supporting provincial governments, but in fact, we kind of do by mouth only. They're often the last to get their funding. So we delegate critical functions of government services to them, but we don't resource them. Can you see? We undermine them. We give powers more and more to the open members. Okay? I'm a former open member. Why is that? Because open members dominate the floor of Parliament. If we can create an upper house, it's going to help to sort of decouple this. Nobody wants more government departments or government agencies. Okay? We're about reforming and supporting the reform process. However, if it is critical in nature, the government has to consider it. What do we do to restore this constitutional balance? So the most important thing Reset tells us is the issues. The solutions can be varied. Having an upper house is not the only solution as part of this package of solutions. It is one traditional method under the Westminster parliamentary democracy to check executive government. You know. Okay, it also achieves decentralization. You can bring reserve seats for women as well. So the equity and participation elements of our constitution, decentralization, constitutional checks and balances, appointment process. Some of the parliamentary committees that are not functioning at the moment because of the dominance of executive government, you can pass it on to this upper house and perhaps they can vet and screen critical appointments, constitutional office holders, like the United States Senate system has this hearings process. You have to go and answer questions, present yourself on camera to the public, take hard questions, to demonstrate you have the ability, proper screening process. So, you know, merit-based system, evidence-based, one of the tenets of Reset is let's do things based on facts and figures. Where's the data? Where's the information? Okay? Less political expediency, more optimality, performance-driven, merit-based, best practice around the world, best governance frameworks. The examples we use, and I was saying the other day, apart from sovereign wealth fund examples, but the BSP Bank, the superannuation industry, the oil palm, you know, what mechanisms work best? Church-run health centers and schools. Think about modalities. Think about, you know, what experience shows us as to what works best. Government, again, it wants to grow bigger. It wants to do everything. But government is not good at doing many things. It's not good at running business. What is the state of our state-owned enterprises today? What is the power system and the status of the water today? Government should not do the things that other agencies can do better under the right circumstances. Government is supposed to be a regulator and a facilitator. That's why I'm saying, give internet to Papua New Guineans. Make internet free. Now that we've battled and got Starlink through, let's utilize this mechanism. How do we best empower Papua New Guineans? Give them knowledge and information. So it comes back to thinking and putting this person here, as I've said many times, put this ordinary Papua New Guinean here in the village at the center of the equation. What is best going to serve that person? Okay? Not those of us sitting around here in Port Moresby drinking coffee and talking about plans and all that. Why is it taking so long to get the resource projects off the ground, for example? What are low-hanging fruit to best serve the people of Papua New Guinea? There needs to be a reset and there needs to be an understanding of what is causing these issues. Before you can address the sickness, you must diagnose it properly.
I think uniquely compared to other development plans, the roadmap proposes 10 big bets. Could you tell us what these 10 big bets are?
There are 5 underlying principles, okay? And then under each of those principles, there is 2 big bets each. And at the risk of boring everybody, I just encourage everyone, again, if you are interested and if you want to make a comment, please go and read these 5 principles and 10 big bets, okay, at www.resetpng. And there is a website, Okay, and there is a Facebook page, and that's why people are sick of my face, because I've been going on there doing videos and all that kind of stuff. Restoring the sanctity and integrity of the Constitution is the first one. Second one, advancing human development and the family. Third one is leveraging data and analysis for decision making. Fourth one is enabling smart, sustainable, inclusive growth. That's the economic side of things. And the fifth one is enabling, sort of on the private sector, ensuring accountability, transparency, and impact is the fifth principle. And under each of those is 10 big bets, which I won't say all of them, but I've already mentioned many of them here today. We are trying to rejig the political governance framework and rejig the bureaucratic framework as well. So there's been a big functional review done on the central agencies that's been done. And I mentioned the fact that we have this legislation coming for the Cabinet to consider to take to Parliament to introduce an upper house. Okay? But there's a range of policies as well to embed these principles, and there's another 4 legislations that are meant to come. One of them is to give more powers to the Chief Secretary. You'll see that was passed recently in the couple of sessions ago, and unfortunately there's a few issues with that. There was interventions by certain public servants, and that has to be revisited again. There's reforms to the Kumul Consolidated Holdings Act around state enterprises. Okay, it has to go through the due process, but we have got the draft legislation ready to remove some of the political interference into state-owned enterprises and to empower the boards a bit more and to give them a bit more independence to make informed decisions without political interference all the time. There's a Public Finance Management Act amendments that are also completed to restore warranting powers back to the bureaucracy and away from the political side of things. Okay? You wait till the details come out, but it's the same principle. Politicians, again, getting involved into areas where they shouldn't. Once you make the national budget, issue the master warrant, it should be handed over to a bureaucratic process to execute according to appropriations and the budget, and to remove discretion out of it through political interference. Okay?
Would that entail relooking at the function of Treasury Department?
There's a functional review that is looking at functionality. Then there's the mechanical process of execution that is being looked at as well. So the functional review is going to inform us on Department of Prime Minister, as I said, the central agency functional review, Treasury, Planning, Finance, Personnel Management, Department of Justice perhaps, and Department of Prime Minister. What's happening and why, where is it breaking down as such? Okay, so that's a process that is being concluded, and it will inform some of this. But regardless of that, there are some obvious bureaucratic issues. You need to allow the bureaucratic process to manage the budget execution a bit more. Okay, it's contemplated that a budget management committee oversees budget execution. Okay, they should be executing warrants, for example. As I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, and you don't want politicians executing warrants. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. But Public Finance Management Act, and then there's a Personnel Management Act as well, that some reforms, less important to me, clarifying the role of the Department of Personnel Management as opposed to the Public Service Commission. The bottom line is to bring accountability, merit-based KPIs to the public service, give Chief Secretary the authority to sanction department heads. Okay, department heads shouldn't be bypassing and going and running to ministers, and there has to be a proper bureaucratic process where the Chief Secretary, that department, is empowered to drive department heads to execute the MTD-P4, which is the plan of the government of the day. When I was a planning minister, there was a disjointedness between the MTDPs and the political cycle. So when you come in as a new member of parliament, you have the old government's MTDP in front of you. That's why I had a 2-year MTDP, MTDP2, to link and marry the political cycle to the planning cycle. So when the new government comes in, it publishes its own MTDP. But the institutional memory ensures that the Constitution and Vision 2050 are infused into it. Okay? Reset Now hopefully is going to clarify some of the other stuff that needs to be elevated in those plans to more important than others. You elevate them in these MTDPs. Okay? So you come in, the relevant department has carriage of that plan, and it is appropriately pushed down into the system with a Chief Secretary that has the powers to do so. Okay, and the other mechanisms around it in terms of execution and procurement. Okay, we shouldn't be parking large sums of money in central agencies and they become implementers and executors and check writers. Okay? So how does this functionality best work? We have to empower the implementing agencies, and we are more coordinating, monitoring, checking up at this level. And there has to be a head that has authority to sanction you, just like a company works. So where does the politics come in? Where does the NEC come in? And then Parliament at the side, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we're reviewing that whole functionality and just trying to ensure the Treasury is doing what it's supposed to be doing, planning is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and etc., etc. There isn't overlapping duplication. There isn't a missing piece. A big missing piece is crisis management, for example. When you have an El Nino or fuel crisis or cyclones, what is the mechanism there at the highest level that we are planning and preempting or advising the Prime Minister and Cabinet properly? That is missing, apart from data and communication. Okay, so the functional review and how we're re-looking at these things as separate kind of activities, but to answer your question, there's a series of activities which is policy, laws, and then there's 43 quick wins, and then there's the awareness, and then there's embedding the process into the bureaucracy so that when we leave tomorrow, there's some hope that it lives on. It doesn't get relegated to the shelf like many of our plans.
From what I gather, a lot of the reforms that you're proposing will be taken on board by the national government. To what extent are provincial governments captured in these reforms?
As I've explained, decentralization is a very important part of our constitution. And we use the Bougainville example in this. When you start to, in a country that is so diverse, such as ours, with 800 different tribes or 1,000 different tribes, there has to be some consideration of those regional differences. That is why provincial governments and lower levels of government are important in that sense to facilitate delivery, okay? Because there's these differences. And if you neglect that, if you centralize too much everything to Waigani, keep all the money and the power here, it's going to lead to issues like Bougainville. So power sharing is a very important part of these considerations. But you can't help. We have political system and political leadership. So how this government, the next government, and so forth adopts these principles, we don't know. It's out of our hand. All we know is that this government has initiated this work. This government will decide how to respond to this work or not. But this Prime Minister has requested this work. We've come in and we just try to do our best to do the best job we can as possible. Communicate like I'm doing today. We've had regional forums. I've addressed the provincial administrators. I've addressed Cabinet. I've addressed the Government Caucus. I've addressed the Chamber of Commerce. I've addressed all the development partners. All the main agencies of government have been addressed. And there's a regional going out to the people, as you know, who've been to Popondetta, to Kokopo, to Madang, to Hagen. I think there's going to be one finish here in Port Moresby. These are all part of this. At the end of the day, if the Prime Minister doesn't believe in this and is more concerned about other activities, it will never get implemented, like any documents. So I just want, ordinary Papua New Guineans to kind of try and educate themselves a bit more about what the issues are. And just take a bit of time, because we sit on our phones and we scroll, those of us who have access to phones who are fortunate enough, or we're busy surviving day to day. I understand that. Papua New Guineans, many of us are struggling. If those of us who can read and have access to the internet, please have a look and examine what the reset is saying, and just think about it a little bit and say, maybe this is maybe we need to look at how we choose our leaders. Maybe we need to look at how we conduct ourselves. Maybe we need to take a bit more responsibility for our lives.
Charles Abel, thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, viewers, that ends this episode of In Focus. Do join us again next week, Monday, on our regular time slot of 7 p.m. Till then, bye for now.
This program was proudly brought to you by Daytech Limited and the National Information and Communications Technology Authority.